What do you mean? What happened? Are you sure? Did you actually believe that?
He can't be serious right now. That is the craziest thing I've heard all week.
I still remember the exact moment my family laughed at me, really laughed like I was some kind of joke standing in my own kitchen. Melissa wrinkled her nose. Ryan wouldn't even look at me, and my granddaughter Emma pushed her plate away in embarrassment. "This smells like something from a museum, Grandma." I stood there holding onto a recipe that had survived generations and realized I hadn't. Then my phone rang. "Hello, is this Jake Gallagher? The governor's office would like to request your cooking for a private dinner." And just like that, the same people who mocked me started laughing even harder. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, I want you to stay with me. And before we go on, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I read every comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe, but more importantly, tell me, what would you have done in my place? I've spent most of my life in kitchens that didn't belong to me. That might sound strange, but it's the truth. Even now, standing in the house my late husband worked so hard to pay off, I still feel like a guest. Like I'm borrowing space instead of living in it. Especially when the people who live here with me don't quite see me anymore. My name is Jake Gallagher. I'm 62 years old, a widow, a mother, a grandmother, and apparently, according to my daughter-in-law, someone who cooks like it's still 1955. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in a modest 2-story house with white siding that's starting to peel around the windows. It's the same house my husband Thomas and I moved into nearly 40 years ago, when Ryan, our only son, was just a baby. Back then, the place smelled like fresh paint and hope. Now it smells like reheated leftovers and silence. After Thomas passed away 5 years ago, everything shifted. Not all at once. No, it was slower than that. Like watching paint fade in sunlight. Ryan moved his wife Melissa and their daughter Emma into the house to help me out. That's what he said. "I don't want you living alone, Mom." At the time, I thought it was love. Now I'm not so sure. Melissa runs the house. Not loudly, not aggressively, but in that quiet, efficient way that leaves no room for anyone else. She likes things clean, quick, and modern. Meals are ordered through apps. Groceries arrive in brown paper bags filled with things I don't recognize. Words like organic, gluten-free, and low-carb have replaced butter flour and sugar. And then there's me. I still wake up early out of habit. I still brew coffee the old way, letting it drip slowly while the kitchen fills with that rich, comforting smell. I still believe food takes time. That flavor comes from patience. That recipes are stories, little pieces of history passed from one pair of hands to another. But in this house, my stories don't seem to matter. The first time Melissa made a comment about my cooking, I laughed it off. "Jake, no one eats like this anymore," she said, staring at the roast I had spent hours preparing. I smiled politely. "Well, maybe they should." She didn't smile back. Ryan didn't say much. "He rarely does these days. He's always tired, always busy. Work bills, responsibilities." I understand that. I really do. But sometimes, I wish he'd look at me the way he used to. Like I was still someone important in his life. Emma, my granddaughter, is 14. Beautiful, bright, and painfully aware of what other people think. Especially her friends. One afternoon, I packed her lunch the way I used to pack Ryan's when he was her age. A simple sandwich, an apple, and a slice of homemade pie wrapped carefully in wax paper. She looked at it like I had handed her something embarrassing. "Grandma, I can't take this to school." "Why not, sweetheart?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then sighed. "It's just weird." "Weird. That word stayed with me longer than I expected. After that, I started cooking less. Not because I wanted to, but because it felt like every time I stepped into the kitchen, I was stepping into a place where I no longer belonged. Still, there are some things you can't let go of. Not completely. My recipes are one of those things. They came from my mother, Eleanor. She wasn't just a good cook. She was the kind of woman who could turn a handful of simple ingredients into something that made people close their eyes when they took the first bite. Food should make people feel safe, she used to say. I didn't understand what she meant back then. I do now. Every recipe I have is written in her handwriting, faded ink on yellowed paper. Some of them are smudged with flour, or dotted with or smudged with flour, or dotted with grease stains. Little notes in the margins, add more cinnamon if it's cold outside, or this one always made your father smile. They're not just instructions, they're memories. And maybe that's why I keep holding on to them grease stains. Little notes in the margins, add more cinnamon if it's cold outside, or this one always made your father smile. They're not just instructions, they're memories. And maybe that's why I keep holding on to them even when no one else seems to care. That night, the night everything started to change, I decided to try again. I don't know why. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was just the quiet fear that if I stopped cooking, I'd lose the last piece of myself that still felt real. I went to the grocery store early that morning. Not the kind Melissa orders from the real kind, with aisles and people and the smell of fresh produce. I took my time picking out each ingredient like it mattered, because to me it did. When I got home, the house was empty. That was the best part. No judgment, no comments, just me and the kitchen. I tied on my old apron, the one with the faded blue flowers, and got to work. I seasoned the pot roast the way my mother taught me. Slow, deliberate, careful. I let it simmer for hours, filling the house with a rich, savory smell that wrapped around me like a memory. I baked cornbread from scratch, the edges golden and crisp. And for dessert, I made peach cobbler. That one was special. It was my mother's recipe passed down from her mother before that. Sweet warm with just a hint of cinnamon. The kind of dessert that made people linger at the table a little longer. By the time Ryan, Melissa, and Emma came home, the house smelled like something from another time. I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd walk in, take a deep breath, and smile. Maybe they'd remember what it felt like to sit down together, to share something real. Maybe, just maybe, they'd see me again. But deep down, there was a small voice whispering the truth I didn't want to hear. Things don't change that easily. And sometimes, the people you love the most are the ones who forget you first. By the time they walked through the front door, the house was wrapped in warmth. Not just the kind that comes from the oven, but the kind that settles into the walls, into your chest, into memories you didn't even realize you still carried. The smell of slow-cooked beef buttery cornbread and sweet peaches drifted through every room like a quiet invitation. For a moment, just one, I let myself believe. I stood at the stove, wiping my hands on my apron, listening to the familiar sounds of keys dropping into a bowl, shoes scraping against the floor, Emma's voice floating in from the hallway. Why does it smell like that? Not what smells good, not what did you make, just that. I swallowed, forcing a smile as I stepped into the dining room. I made dinner, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Thought we could all sit together tonight. Melissa appeared first, her purse still hanging from her shoulder, her eyes scanning the table like she was inspecting something she hadn't ordered. The plates were already set. Real plates, not paper. Silverware laid neatly beside folded napkins. A pot roast sat at the center, steam rising slowly, surrounded by bowls of vegetables, fresh cornbread, and the peach cobbler cooling by the window. For a second, she said nothing. Then she wrinkled her nose. Oh, wow. That word again. Ryan walked in behind her, loosening his tie. He paused when he saw the table, then glanced at me briefly before looking away. Mom, what is all this? Dinner, I repeated softer this time. I thought maybe we could eat together tonight. Emma lingered near the doorway, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. She didn't come closer. Melissa stepped forward, lifting the lid off the pot roast. The smell intensified, rich and savory, filling the space between us. She leaned back slightly. Jake, this is a lot. I had time today, I said. I wanted to make something nice. She set the lid back down gently, like she was trying not to offend me, but the damage had already started. We usually don't eat this heavy, she said, glancing at Ryan. You know that. Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, Mom, it's just, we've been trying to eat lighter. Lighter, as if what I made carried more than just flavor. As if it was something to be avoided. I can make something else next time, I said quickly. I just thought Grandma. I can't eat that. Emma interrupted. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through everything. I turned to her. Why not, sweetheart? She shifted uncomfortably. It's greasy, and my friends don't eat stuff like this. There it was again. Not what she liked, not what tasted good, what her friends would think. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my smile in place. I had gotten very good at that over the years. Well, I said gently, it's okay to try something different sometimes. She shook her head, stepping back. I'm not hungry. Melissa sighed softly, as if this entire situation was exhausting. Jake, you should have told me you were planning this. I already ordered dinner. My hands went still. You ordered dinner. Yeah, she said, pulling out her phone. It'll be here in like 10 minutes. Salads and grilled chicken. I looked at the table, at the hours I had spent, at the care I had poured into every dish. Oh, I said. Just one word. Ryan glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable. Well, maybe we can save this for later, he offered weakly. Yeah, Melissa said quickly. We can put it in the fridge. In the fridge? Like leftovers, like something already forgotten. I nodded slowly, even though every part of me wanted to say something, anything to make them understand. But what was the point? They had already decided what this was worth. Emma had already disappeared upstairs. Melissa was already tapping on her phone. Ryan was already turning away. And I was standing in the middle of a table that no one wanted. I turned back toward the kitchen, blinking hard, telling myself not to cry. Not over something as small as dinner. That's when my phone rang. The sound was sharp, unexpected. It echoed in the quiet space like something breaking. For a moment, no one moved. Then Melissa glanced at me. You gonna get that? I hesitated, then reached for it, my fingers trembling slightly. Hello? There was a brief pause on the other end. Then a calm, professional voice spoke. Good evening. Is this Jake Gallagher? I frowned slightly. Yes, this is she. My name is Andrew Collins. I'm calling from the office of Governor Daniel Whitaker. I blinked, certain I had misheard. I'm sorry. From where? The governor's office, he repeated. We were hoping to speak with you regarding a private dinner request. I felt the room shift. Not physically, but something changed, like the air itself had paused. I think you might have the wrong number, I said carefully. No, ma'am, he replied. We have your name and number listed specifically. Governor Whitaker would like to request your cooking services for an upcoming dinner. My grip tightened around the phone. My cooking, yes, ma'am. We're looking for a very specific style of home-cooked meal. We were told you might be able to provide that. Told? By who? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Behind me, I could feel Melissa watching. Ryan, too. What kind of dinner, I managed to ask. A small private gathering, Andrew said. The governor has expressed a particular interest in traditional recipes. Specifically, he paused briefly. Peach cobbler. My heart skipped. Peach cobbler. I slowly turned my head, looking at the dish by the window, the one I had just made. How do you know about that? I whispered. I'm afraid I don't have those details, he said politely, but the request was very clear. Would you be available to discuss further? I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't want to, but because something inside me had just cracked open. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. But it didn't make sense either. Behind me, Melissa let out a short laugh. Jake, who is that? I covered the phone slightly. They're saying they're from the governor's office. For a second, there was silence. Then she laughed harder. Oh my God. Seriously, Ryan shook his head, a small, tired smile forming on his face. Mom, it's probably a scam. I don't think... Come on, Melissa interrupted. They're calling about your cooking. That's not how this works. Her words landed heavier than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as heavy as she intended. I turned back to the phone, my voice unsteady. I'm not sure. Of course you're not, Melissa said loudly, not even trying to lower her voice. Jake, just hang up. You're going to give them your information, and then what? They'll drain your bank account. Ryan sighed. Yeah, Mom, just be careful. Careful, as if I wasn't capable of telling the difference between reality and a lie. I felt something inside me shrink. I'm sorry, I said into the phone. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Ma'am, I assure you. But I hung up. The silence that followed was louder than anything that had come before. Melissa shook her head, still smiling slightly. People will try anything these days. Ryan gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder, quick, distant. You did the right thing. I nodded. Because what else was I supposed to do? Around me, the house returned to normal. Melissa went back to her phone. Ryan sat down, waiting for the delivery. The smell of my cooking still filled the air, but now it felt out of place. Like it didn't belong here. Like I didn't belong here. I looked at the table one last time. At the food no one would eat. At the effort no one had seen. At the life I had built that no one seemed to remember. And for the first time in a long time, I started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was outdated. Maybe I was holding on to something that no longer had a place in this world. Maybe I was the one who didn't belong anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, and the occasional creak of the house settling into itself. The same house I had lived in for decades, but somehow it had never felt quieter or lonelier. The conversation replayed in my mind over and over again. The governor's office. We would like to request your cooking. Peach cobbler. And then, just as clearly, Melissa laughing, Ryan dismissing it. That small, almost embarrassed smile he gave me, like I was a child who had fallen for something obvious. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket tighter around me, but it didn't help. The cold wasn't outside, it was somewhere deeper. Maybe they were right. That thought settled in slowly like something heavy sinking to the bottom of water. Maybe it was a scam. After all, why would someone was a scam? After all, why would someone like the governor, someone important, someone surrounded by professional chefs and caterers, reach out to me, a 62-year-old woman who couldn't even get her own family to eat her cooking? It didn't make sense. And yet, like the governor, someone important, someone surrounded by professional chefs and caterers, reach out to me. A 62-year-old woman who couldn't even get her own family to eat her cooking. It didn't make sense. And yet, that voice on the phone hadn't sounded fake. It had been calm, professional, certain, not rushed, not pushy. And the way he said it, peach cobbler, my peach cobbler. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. How would they know that I whispered into the darkness? No answer came. Of course it didn't. Morning arrived too quickly. I went through my usual routine on autopilot, coffee toast dishes. Melissa and Ryan left early, barely saying goodbye. Emma didn't come downstairs at all. The house returned to silence, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This one felt charged, like something unfinished was waiting for me. I stood at the sink, staring out the window at the backyard. The grass needed trimming. The old oak tree still stood tall, just like it had when Ryan used to climb it as a boy. Back then, he used to call for me. "Mom, look at me." And I would, every single time. Now he barely looked at me at all. I wiped my hands slowly on a dish towel, my eyes drifting toward the small piece of paper I had left on the counter. The number. I had written it down last night before everything spiraled. I walked over and picked it up. For a moment, I just held it. My fingers traced the ink, as if it might disappear if I pressed too hard. "This is ridiculous," I muttered. But I didn't put it down. Instead, I reached for the phone. My heart started to pound the second I picked it up. What was I doing? What if Melissa was right? What if I was about to embarrass myself even more? Or worse, what if this was real? The thought stopped me cold, because that possibility, small as it was, felt more terrifying than the idea of being wrong. Slowly, I dialed the number. Each ring felt louder than the last. 1, 2, 3. Governor Whitaker's office. "How may I direct your call?" The voice was different this time. Female. Clear. Efficient. My throat tightened. I'm calling about a request I received last night." I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Jake Gallagher." There was a brief pause. Then, "Yes, Ms. Gallagher. Please hold." My heart stopped. She knew my name. I gripped the edge of the counter, steadying myself as soft music filled the line. This was real. Or at least real enough to feel dangerous. A few seconds later, the line clicked again. "Ms. Gallagher. This is Andrew Collins. We spoke briefly last night." It was him. The same voice. The same calm certainty. "Yes," I said quickly. "Yes, I remember." "I understand the call may have come as a surprise," he continued. "I'm glad you called back." I swallowed hard. I just wanted to make sure this isn't some kind of mistake. There was a slight pause. Then very gently, "It's not a mistake, ma'am." My breath caught. "We have a very specific request from Governor Whitaker," he continued. "And your name was provided directly to us." "Provided by who?" I asked. "I'm afraid I don't have that information," he said. "But I can assure you this is a legitimate invitation." I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to slow my heartbeat. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We would like you to prepare a private dinner for the governor and a small group of guests," he explained. "A home-style meal, Traditional, authentic, authentic. That word felt different, not outdated, not old-fashioned. Something else. Something valuable. And why me? I asked quietly. There was a longer pause this time. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, just slightly. Because the governor believes you can provide something no one else can. I closed my eyes. No one else. For years, I had felt like I had nothing to offer anymore. Nothing anyone wanted. And now, someone was telling me the exact opposite. I don't understand, I whispered. You don't need to understand everything right now, he said kindly. You just need to decide if you're willing. Willing. The word echoed in my mind. Was I thought about last night, about the laughter, about the untouched food, about the way I had stood there invisible in my own home. And then I thought about something else. My mother, standing in a small kitchen, sleeves rolled up flour on her hands, humming softly as she worked. Food should make people feel safe. I opened my eyes. When would this dinner be? I asked. This Saturday evening, Andrew replied. We would provide transportation and cover all expenses. You would have full access to our kitchen facilities. Saturday. That gave me just a few days. My mind raced. Ingredients, timing, preparation, all the things I hadn't had to think about seriously in years. I would need to prepare, I said. Slowly. Of course, he said. We can arrange everything you need. I hesitated. Then, I'll do it. The words came out before I could stop them. There was a brief silence. Then, excellent, Andrew said. We'll send you the full details shortly. The call ended soon after. And just like that, everything changed. I stood there for a long time staring at the phone in my hand. I had said yes, not because I was sure, not because I was confident, but because for the first time in years, someone had asked for me. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because they believed I had something worth giving. I slowly looked around the kitchen, at the same counters, the same cabinets, the same space where I had felt so small just the night before. It didn't look different, but somehow it felt different. Because now, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just cooking to be seen. I was cooking because someone already saw me, and that thought scared me more than anything else. The moment I hung up the phone, the kitchen felt too small. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the walls had moved closer without warning. The same space that had once held all my doubts now struggled to contain something else entirely. Hope and fear. They sat side by side in my chest, neither one willing to give way. I placed the phone down carefully, almost as if it might shatter if I moved too quickly. My hands were still trembling, and I pressed them flat against the counter, grounding myself in something solid. This is real, I whispered. Saying it out loud made it heavier, more dangerous, because if it was real, then I could fail. And that thought, more than anything, terrified me. I looked around the kitchen again, seeing it differently now. Not as a place where I had been dismissed, but as the starting point of something I didn't yet understand. Saturday, just a few days away. I didn't have time to doubt. I needed to prepare. I moved slowly at first, pulling open drawers, checking what I had, making mental lists the way I used to years ago. Ingredients, timing, portions, presentation. It had been a long time since anyone had expected something from me. A long time since it mattered if I got it right. I found my old recipe box tucked away in the back of a cabinet. The lid creaked slightly as I opened it, revealing stacks of index cards, some curled at the edges, others stained from years of use. I ran my fingers over them gently. Pot roast, cornbread, green beans with bacon, peach cobbler. Each one felt like a piece of my mother's voice echoing back to me. Take your time, Jake. Don't rush it. Good food isn't fast. It's honest. I smiled faintly, blinking away the sudden sting in my eyes. I remember I whispered, but remembering wasn't enough. This wasn't just dinner. This was something bigger, something I didn't fully understand yet. And that uncertainty pressed down on me harder than anything else. Why me? That question kept circling back, no matter how much I tried to focus on the practical things. Out of all the chefs, all the restaurants, all the people in this state, why would the governor ask for me? A woman who had spent the last 5 years being told subtly and not so subtly that what she did didn't matter anymore. It didn't add up. Unless my thoughts drifted back to what Andrew had said. Your name was provided directly to us. Provided by someone who knew me, someone who knew my cooking, someone who knew about my peach cobbler. I froze. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly like a shadow stretching across the floor. There were only a few people who knew those recipes well enough to recognize them. My family, but that didn't make sense. Melissa barely tolerated my cooking. Ryan hadn't paid attention in years. Emma, she wouldn't have even known what to say. So, who else? I leaned back against the counter, my mind searching through memories I hadn't touched in decades. Kentucky, the small kitchen, my mother standing at the stove, and then a flicker, a face, a boy, young, thin, quiet, sitting at the corner of the table watching everything with wide, hungry eyes. I blinked, trying to hold on to the image, but it slipped away before I could fully grasp it. No sitting at the corner of the table watching everything with wide, hungry eyes. I blinked, trying to hold on to the image, but it slipped away before I could fully grasp it. No, I whispered. It couldn't be that simple or that complicated. I shook my head, forcing myself back into the present. I didn't have time to chase ghosts. I had a dinner to prepare. The rest of the day passed in a blur of movement. I made lists, real ones, on paper the way I always had. I checked the pantry, the fridge, the freezer. I wrote down everything I would need, everything I might need, and even things I probably wouldn't. Because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. By the time the front door opened that evening, I had already been working for hours. Melissa walked in first, her heels clicking against the floor. She paused when she saw the kitchen table covered in papers, ingredients, and open cookbooks. "What's all this?" she asked, her tone sharp with curiosity. I didn't look up right away. I finished writing a note, then set the pen down carefully. "I called them back," I said. Silence. Then, "You what?" I turned to face her. I called the number. It wasn't a scam. Ryan had just stepped into the room and he froze mid-motion. "Mom." They confirmed everything. I continued, my voice steadier than I expected. "The dinner. The request. It's real." Melissa let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're serious right now?" "Yes." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to process it. "And you what? You said yes, I did." The words hung in the air between us. Melissa stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, or maybe like she didn't recognize me at all. "Jake, you don't even know what you're getting into," she said slowly. "I know enough," I replied. "Do you?" she shot back. "Because this isn't some church potluck. This is the governor. There are expectations. Standards." I met her gaze. "I'm aware." She crossed her arms. Then why would they ask you? There it was. Not curiosity, not support, doubt. The same doubt I had been living with for years. I felt it rise up in my chest, but this time something pushed back against it. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm going to find out. Ryan sighed heavily. Mom, what if this goes wrong? I looked at him, really looked at him. And for a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, one who believed I could fix anything. I've spent a long time being afraid of getting things wrong, I said quietly. I think I'm done with that. Neither of them responded. Melissa shook her head slightly, as if she had already decided how this would end. Ryan looked away, and just like that, I realized something important. They didn't believe in me. Not really. Not anymore. And maybe they hadn't for a long time. But for the first time in years, that didn't stop me. Because somewhere out there, someone did. And that was enough. At least for now. That night after everyone had gone to bed, I pulled out a box I hadn't opened in years. It was tucked away in the back of my closet behind old coats and a suitcase I hadn't used since Thomas was still alive. Dust clung to the lid, and for a moment I just stood there staring at it, unsure if I was ready for whatever memories waited inside. But something had already been set in motion, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I carried the box to my bed and sat down slowly, brushing the dust away with the palm of my hand. The cardboard was worn at the edges, softened by time, just like everything else I had tried to forget. When I opened it, the smell hit me first. Old paper, fabric, time. Inside were pieces of a life I had left behind. Photographs, handwritten notes, a folded apron faded from years of washing, and beneath it all, a small stack of recipe cards. Not copies, the originals. My mother's handwriting stared back at me, familiar, steady, full of quiet strength. Eleanor Gallagher. Even now, just thinking her name made something in my chest tighten. She had been everything I wasn't sure I could ever be. Strong, capable, unshakable. And yet, life hadn't been kind to her, or to us. I picked up one of the photos, holding it carefully between my fingers. It was old black and white, slightly bent at the corners. In it, I stood beside my mother in a small kitchen. I couldn't have been more than 12. My hair was pulled back messily, and I was smiling in that open, fearless way children do before the world teaches them to hold back. My mother stood next to me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. And behind us, there was a boy. I froze. I brought the photo closer to my face, my heart starting to pound. He was thin, maybe a year or two older than me. His clothes were worn but clean. His eyes, I remembered those eyes. Quiet, watchful, hungry, but not just for food, for something more. Recognition hit me slowly like a door opening, just a crack at a time. Oh my God, I whispered. I hadn't thought about him in decades. Not really. But now the memory came rushing back. We had been living in Kentucky back then. Not the kind of place people talked about, not in a good way at least. Small, poor. The kind of town where everyone knew your name, but no one could help you if you needed it. My mother worked for a family on the edge of town. Not rich in the way people imagine with big houses and fancy cars, but well off compared to us. They had land, stability, things we didn't. She cooked for them, cleaned, did whatever needed to be done, and sometimes she took me with her. That way, you'll learn something useful, she used to say. But it wasn't just about learning. It was about survival. I remembered that kitchen now. It wasn't large, but it was warm. Always warm. The kind of place where something was always cooking, always simmering, always waiting. And that boy, he had been there almost every time we were. At first I thought he belonged to the family, but he didn't. He was something else. I closed my eyes, letting the memory settle into place. He had been staying with them, not permanently, just there. I never fully understood why. Back then, I didn't ask questions. Children don't always realize what's strange and what isn't. All I knew was that he was quiet. He didn't talk much, but he watched everything, especially my mother, especially when she cooked. "Can I help?" I used to ask, eager to prove I could do more than just stand there. My mother would smile. "Of course, Jake. Start with the potatoes." And I would, peeling, chopping, learning, and sometimes the boy would step closer. Not too close, just enough to see, to learn. My mother never pushed him away. In fact, she treated him the same way she treated me. "Come here," she'd say gently. "If you're going to watch, you might as well learn something." He rarely spoke, but he listened. Every instruction, every story, every little detail she shared. And one day, I remembered it clearly now. She made peach cobbler, the same one I had made just days ago, the same one that had somehow reached the governor's office. I could still see it, the way the peaches softened in the oven, the way the crust turned golden, the way the smell filled the entire room, wrapping around us like something comforting and safe. The boy had stood there the whole time, watching, waiting. When it was finally ready, my mother cut a piece and handed it to him. "Go on," she said. "Tell me what you think." He hesitated, then took a bite, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, not loud or obvious, but it was real. And my mother noticed. She always noticed. "That's what good food does," she said softly. "It reminds you that you're not alone." I opened my eyes, my breath catching. The memory felt too clear, too vivid, too important to ignore. "Daniel," I whispered. The name came to me like it had been waiting all along. Daniel. That was his name. Daniel Whitaker. My heart started to race. No, it couldn't be. Could it? I looked back at the photo, my fingers trembling slightly as I traced the outline of his face. The boy in the picture, the man on the phone, the governor, the same person. It felt impossible. And yet, what were the chances? What were the chances that someone somewhere would remember a peach cobbler from decades ago from a small kitchen in Kentucky, from a woman no one else seemed to remember, unless he never forgot? I leaned back against the bed, the weight of it all pressing down on me. If it was him, then this dinner wasn't just a request. It was something else, something deeper, something personal. And suddenly, the fear I had been feeling shifted. It didn't disappear, but it changed. Because now I wasn't just walking into a room full of strangers. I was walking into a past I had buried, a past that had somehow found its way back to me, and I didn't know if I was ready for that. But ready or not, Saturday was coming, and with it, the truth. The next morning, everything felt sharper. Not clearer, just sharper. Like the world had edges now, and I could feel every single one of them. Saturday was only 2 days away. 2 days to prepare for something I still didn't fully understand. 2 days to step into a place where I didn't belong. 2 days to prove something. I just wasn't sure what. I stood in the kitchen early that morning, coffee in hand, staring at the list I had made the night before. It was longer than it needed to be. I knew that. But writing it had calmed me. It had given me something solid to hold on to. Now I needed to act. I started gathering ingredients, checking what I had and what I didn't. Flour, sugar, butter, those were easy. But I wanted everything to be perfect. Not just acceptable. Not just good enough. Perfect. Because this wasn't just about cooking anymore. This was about memory, about truth, about whether or not the past I remembered actually mattered to someone else. I was halfway through organizing the pantry when I heard footsteps behind me. "You're really doing this," Melissa's voice. I didn't turn around right away. "Yes," I said simply. She walked further into the kitchen, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "I thought you might have changed your mind overnight." I closed the pantry door slowly and turned to face her. I didn't. She studied me for a moment, like she was trying to figure something out. "Jake, I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "This makes me nervous." I almost laughed. Of all the reactions I had expected from her, that wasn't one of them. "Nervous?" I repeated. "Yes," she said, "because if this is real and I'm still not completely convinced it is, you're putting yourself in a position where things could go very wrong." I tilted my head slightly. "Wrong for who?" "For you," she said quickly. "And for us." There it was again. Us. I took a slow breath. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I've already made my decision." Her jaw tightened slightly. "That's just it, Jake," she said. "You made this decision without thinking about how it affects the rest of us." I felt something shift inside me. For years I had thought about nothing but how my choices affected them. Every meal, every word, every moment I chose to stay quiet instead of speaking up. "And now, you're right," I said softly. She blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. "I didn't think about how it affects you," I continued. "Because for a long time, I've been the only one doing that." The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable, necessary. Melissa looked at me differently, then not with dismissal, but with something closer to uncertainty. Before she could respond, Ryan walked in. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between us. "Your mom is preparing for her big debut," Melissa said, her tone light, but edged with something sharper underneath. Ryan sighed, running a hand over his face. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded. We sat at the kitchen table, just the two of us. Melissa stayed nearby, pretending to scroll through her phone, but clearly listening. Ryan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I need you to be honest with me," he said. "I always am," I replied. "Do you really believe this is what you think it is?" I met his eyes. "I don't know what it is," I said truthfully, "but I know it's real." He hesitated. "And you're not worried?" I thought about that for a moment. "I am," I admitted, "more than I've been in a long time." "Then why do it?" The question hung between us. Simple, direct, harder to answer than it should have been. I looked down at my hands, noticing how steady they were now compared to the day before. "Because someone asked me to," I said quietly. Ryan frowned. "That's it, no," I said, shaking my head. "Because someone saw me." That made him pause, and for a brief moment I saw something shift in his expression. Confusion, recognition, maybe even a little guilt. "I see you, Mom," he said quickly. I looked back at him. No, you don't. The words came out softer than I expected, but they carried more weight than anything I had said in years. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because deep down, he knew I was right. I stood up slowly. I'm not doing this to prove anything to you, I said, or to Melissa, or to anyone else. Then who? He asked. I hesitated. Then, myself. The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not tense, not hostile, just honest. Ryan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I just don't want you to get hurt, he said. I smiled faintly. That's already happened, I replied. More times than you realize. He looked down at the table, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't have anything to say. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went to the grocery store again, this time with purpose. Not hesitation, not doubt. Purpose. I selected each ingredient carefully, just like I always had. But this time, there was something different in the way I moved. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to prove I still had value. I was simply doing what I knew how to do, and that felt like enough. When I returned home, I began preparing what I could in advance. Measuring, chopping, organizing. Every movement was deliberate. Every step mattered, because this wasn't just about getting through the dinner. It was about honoring something that had been buried for too long. That night, as I stood in the kitchen alone, I found myself thinking about him again. Daniel. The boy from the photograph. The boy who had stood quietly in the corner, watching my mother cook. The boy who had smiled for the first time after tasting her peach cobbler. If he was the same man, if he was really Governor Whitaker, then this wasn't just a coincidence. It was a thread, a connection that had somehow survived decades of distance change and silence. And now, it was pulling me back. I looked down at my hands dusted lightly with flour. The same hands that had learned from my mother. The same hands that had been dismissed at my own dinner table. The same hands that would soon cook for someone who remembered. I took a deep breath. I won't mess this up, I whispered. Not because I needed to be perfect, but because for the first time in years, this mattered, and so did I. Saturday arrived faster than I was ready for. I woke up before the sun, not because I had to, but because sleep had already left me hours earlier. My mind had been running all night, circling the same thoughts, the same questions, the same quiet fear that had followed me since I said yes. But there was no turning back now. I stood in the kitchen while the rest of the house was still asleep, the faint blue light of early morning slipping through the windows. Everything was already prepared. Ingredients measured, recipes memorized. Tools packed neatly into a small box I insisted on bringing with me, because some things, no matter how modern the kitchen, still needed to feel like mine. I poured myself a cup of coffee and didn't drink it. Instead, I just held it, letting the warmth settle into my hands. You've done this your whole life, I whispered to myself. But that wasn't entirely true. I had cooked for family, for neighbors, for church gatherings, for people who expected something simple, something familiar. Today was different. Today, I was stepping into a place where people would expect something more, something I wasn't sure I could give. A car arrived just before 9, black, polished, quiet. I almost didn't open the door when I heard the knock. Not because I didn't know who it was, but because, once I did, everything would become real. Mrs. Gallagher, the driver said politely when I finally opened it. I'm here to take you to the governor's residence. I nodded. You'll just need a minute. I turned back inside, scanning the house one last time. Melissa was already awake, standing near the stairs. Ryan stood behind her arms, crossed, his expression unreadable. Emma lingered halfway up the steps, watching me with something I couldn't quite name. Curiosity. Maybe even a hint of respect. "You're really going," Melissa said. "I am." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Just be careful," she said. The words were the same as before, but the tone was different, less dismissive, more uncertain. I gave a small nod. "I will." Ryan stepped forward next. "Call us when you're done," he said. "Let us know you got home safe. I almost smiled. "I will," I said again. Emma didn't say anything, but as I walked past her, she spoke quietly. "Grandma?" I stopped. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "Good luck." 2 simple words, but they stayed with me longer than anything else. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, and just like that, I left the life I knew behind. The drive felt longer than it probably was. I sat in the back seat, hands folded tightly in my lap, watching the city pass by in a blur of movement and noise. People walking, cars rushing, life continuing like nothing was different. But for me, everything was. As we moved further away from my neighborhood, the streets widened. The houses grew larger, cleaner, more distant from one another. And then we arrived. The governor's residence stood tall behind iron gates, surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges and guarded by security that didn't miss a single detail. The car slowed, then stopped. "Here we are," the driver said. I nodded, but didn't move right away. This was it, the place where everything would either come together or fall apart. The door opened, and a security officer approached. "Name?" he asked. "Jake Gallagher." He checked something on a tablet, then nodded. "Welcome, Miss Gallagher." "Welcome." The word felt strange here, like it didn't quite belong to me. I stepped out of the car, slowly adjusting my coat, trying to steady my breathing. The air felt different here, sharper, cleaner, less forgiving. Another staff member approached a woman in a crisp uniform, her posture straight, her expression professional. "Ms. Gallagher, I'm Rebecca. I'll be assisting you today." "Thank you," I said. She gestured toward the entrance. "This way, please." As I followed her inside, the scale of everything hit me all at once. High ceilings, polished floors, walls lined with artwork that probably cost more than my entire house. Everything was quiet, but not empty. It was controlled, intentional, like every detail had been carefully chosen. And then there was me, walking through it all in sensible shoes and a coat I had owned for years. I felt it immediately. The looks. Not rude, not obvious, but there. Staff members glanced at me briefly, their eyes lingering just long enough to question. Who is she? Why is she here? Does she belong? I lowered my gaze slightly, focusing on Rebecca's footsteps ahead of me. "Right this way," she said again, leading me through a long hallway. We turned a corner, and suddenly, the kitchen. It was larger than any kitchen I had ever seen. Bright, stainless steel, organized to perfection, multiple workstations, ovens that looked more like something from a laboratory than a home, and people, professional chefs, assistants, staff moving with precision and speed. Every movement had purpose. Every action was practiced. And when I stepped inside, everything slowed. Not completely, but enough. Enough for them to notice me. The room didn't stop, but it shifted. Eyes turned. whispers followed. And in that moment, I felt smaller than I had in years. Rebecca stepped forward confidently. "Everyone, this is Miss Gallagher," she announced. "She'll be leading the preparation for this evening's dinner." Leading? The word echoed louder than anything else. A man in a chef's coat stepped forward, his expression polite but guarded. "I'm Chef Martin," he said, "head of kitchen operations." I nodded. "Nice to meet you." His eyes flicked briefly over my clothes, my hands, my face. Measuring, judging. "You'll have access to whatever you need," he said. "Just let us know." But his tone said something else. "Let's see if you can actually do this." I swallowed, forcing myself to stand a little straighter. "Thank you," I replied. Rebecca gave me a reassuring smile before stepping back. "I'll leave you to it," she said. And just like that, I was alone. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I looked around the kitchen, at the people, at the equipment, at the expectations hanging silently in the air. This wasn't my world. It never had been. And yet, for some reason, I had been brought here. I took a slow breath, then stepped forward. One step, then another, until I reached the counter that had been set aside for me. My space, my responsibility, my moment. I placed my box of tools down, carefully opening it with steady hands. Inside were the things I trusted, the things that had never failed me, the things that connected me to something real. I looked up one last time, at the room, at the people, at the challenge in front of me. And then I got to work, because no matter where I was, no matter who was watching, this was the one thing I knew how to do. And today, it had to be enough. The first hour passed in silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that presses against your ears, making every small sound feel louder than it should be. The clink of metal against metal. The hum of ovens warming. The quiet shuffle of shoes across polished floors. And beneath it all, the weight of eyes watching. I could feel them even when I didn't look. Chef Martin stayed nearby, not hovering, but close enough. Close enough to step in if I made a mistake. Close enough to confirm what he already suspected, that I didn't belong here. I ignored it, or at least I tried to. I focused on what I knew. I washed my hands slowly, deliberately. I laid out my ingredients the way I always had organized intentional familiar. This part was mine. No matter where I stood, this part belonged to me. I started with the basics. Vegetables first. Clean, peel, cut. My hands moved on their own, guided by years of habit. The knife felt right in my grips. Steady, balanced, familiar, in a way nothing else in that room was. I could feel the tension in my shoulders slowly begin to loosen. Not completely, but enough. Knife skills are solid. The voice came from my left. I glanced up. Chef Martin stood with his arms crossed, watching me closely. There was no smile on his face, but there was something else. Surprise. "Thank you," I said simply. He nodded once, then looked away. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't dismissal either. And right now, that was enough. Time moved differently in that kitchen. Faster somehow. Before I realized it, I had already begun preparing the pot roast. Seasoning the meat carefully, just like my mother had taught me. Not rushing. Never rushing. "Let it breathe," she used to say. "Food needs time to become itself." I pressed the seasoning into the surface gently, feeling the texture, the weight, the familiarity of it all. Around me, the kitchen continued its rhythm. But slowly, something shifted. The whispers stopped. The glances changed. Not gone. Just different. Curiosity had replaced judgment, and I could feel it. A young assistant stepped closer, watching me work. "What are you making?" she asked quietly. "Pot roast," I said. "S." He tilted her head slightly. "That's it." Curiosity had replaced judgment, and I could feel it. A young assistant stepped closer, watching me work. "What are you making?" she asked quietly. "Pot roast," I said. She tilted her head slightly. "That's it." I smiled faintly. "That's everything." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway, and stayed, watching, learning, just like he had once. The memory flickered again. Daniel, standing quietly in the corner, eyes focused, absorbing everything. I shook the thought away gently. Not now. I needed to stay here, in this moment, in this kitchen. But then, the door opened, and everything stopped. Not the movement, not the work, but something deeper. The energy shifted, people straightened, voices lowered. And I knew, without turning around, he was here. I felt it before I saw him. That strange pull in my chest. That quiet recognition that didn't make sense, but felt undeniable. I turned slowly. Governor Daniel Whitaker stood in the doorway. He wasn't dressed the way I expected. No suit, no formal presence, just a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled slightly at the cuffs. But there was something about him that filled the room anyway. Not power, not exactly. Presence. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. His eyes moved across the kitchen, taking everything in. Then they landed on me, and stayed there. For a moment, no one spoke. Not him, not me, not anyone. It was as if the room had been paused. Like something important was happening, and everyone else could feel it, even if they didn't understand it. He stepped forward slowly. Not toward the chefs, not toward the staff, toward me. Each step measured, intentional. And with every step, that feeling in my chest grew stronger. Recognition. Not mine. His. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to see clearly, close enough to confirm what he already knew. "Ms. Gallagher," he said. His voice was deeper than I expected, calmer, but there was something in it, something underneath the surface. "Yes," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He studied my face, not in a casual way, in a searching way, like he was looking for something specific, something only he could recognize. And then, a small shift. Not a smile. Not yet. But something close. "You came?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I did." He nodded slowly. His eyes moved briefly to the counter, to the ingredients, to the peach slices resting in a bowl nearby. Then, back to me. "I had hoped you would." There was a pause, long enough to feel, short enough to keep control. I wasn't sure at first, I admitted. "I understand," he said quietly, and somehow I believed him, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like he understood hesitation. Like he had lived with it. He glanced around this kitchen briefly, then back at me. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the counter. I stepped aside slightly. "Of course." He moved closer, his attention fixed on the ingredients. The peaches, the flour, the small details most people would overlook. But not him. He reached out, not touching, just hovering slightly, like he was remembering something through them. "My mother used to cook like this," he said. The words were simple, but they landed heavily. I watched him carefully, No, he added after a moment, shaking his head slightly. Not like this. He looked up at me again. Like her. My breath caught. The room around us faded slightly. Not completely, but enough. Enough for this moment to stand on its own. You remember her? I said softly. It wasn't a question. His expression changed then. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to confirm what I had started to believe. I never forgot, he said. And just like that, the past wasn't buried anymore. It was standing right in front of me. Alive, real, and finally, ready to be told. For a moment, I couldn't move. The kitchen was still alive around us, pots, clinking footsteps, moving quiet orders being exchanged, but everything felt distant. Like I was standing inside a memory while the present continued without me. I never forgot. His words stayed between us heavier than anything else in that room. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. Neither did I said, though it wasn't entirely true. I had forgotten him. Or maybe I had buried him under years of survival responsibilities and silence. But now, standing here, looking at him not as the boy in the corner, but as the man who had somehow become Governor Whitaker, I realized something important. Some memories don't disappear. They wait. And when they return, they bring everything with them. He studied my face again as if searching for confirmation. You look different, he said. I let out a small, almost nervous breath. I should hope so. It's been, 40 years? 43, he said immediately. The precision of his answer caught me off guard. You kept track? I said softly. He didn't smile. I remembered he corrected. There was something in the way he said it that made my chest tighten. Not nostalgia, something deeper, something unresolved. A silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, but full. You used to stand right there, he said, suddenly pointing to a spot near the counter. Peeling potatoes, always too fast. I blinked, and my mother would tell me to slow down, I said. His expression shifted just slightly. She told you everything, he said. She taught me everything, I replied. Another pause. Then, she saved me. The words were quiet, but they landed harder than anything else he had said. I felt my breath catch. How I asked. He hesitated. For the first time since he walked into the room, he hesitated. Not as the governor, as Daniel. I didn't have much back then, he said slowly. No stability, no real home. I moved around a lot. Different places, different people. His eyes drifted briefly, not away from me, but inward. That family, the one your mother worked for, they took me in for a while. He continued, but I was just there, not really part of anything. I nodded slowly. I remembered that feeling. Even as a child, I had sensed it. He noticed everything I said quietly. Daniel looked at me again, surprised. You remember that? I remember how you watched, I said. Like you were trying to understand how things worked. He let out a soft breath. I was, he admitted, because nothing in my life made sense. His gaze shifted to the counter again. To me, that kitchen was the only place that felt steady, he said. Your mother made everything feel predictable, safe. I felt my throat tighten. That's what she always said. I whispered. Food should make people feel safe. He nodded. She was right. Silence again. But this time, It wasn't empty. It was filled with something fragile, something shared. And you, he said, his voice softening slightly, you didn't treat me like I didn't belong. I frowned slightly. I was just a kid. You were kind, he corrected. The word hit me harder than I expected. Kind. No one had called me that in a long time. Not in a way that meant something. I don't think I did anything special, I said. You did, he said firmly. You didn't ignore me. That was all. Not a grand gesture. Not a life-changing act. Just not ignoring someone. And somehow, that had mattered. More than I ever knew. I looked down at the counter at the ingredients I had been working with just minutes before. At the peaches. At the flour. At the quiet evidence of a life I thought had lost its meaning. And the cobbler. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled then, finally. Not the kind of smile people give for cameras or audiences. A real one, small, honest. That was the first time I felt something good that didn't disappear right after. He said. I felt my eyes sting. I used to wait for her to make it, he continued. Not because of the taste, though it was the best I've ever had, but because of what it meant. What did it mean, I asked. He met my gaze. It meant I wasn't invisible. The words settled deep inside me, because I understood them, more than he could possibly know. For years I had felt exactly that, invisible, in my own home, at my own table, cooking meals no one noticed, giving pieces of myself no one valued. And now, standing here, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe. I had never been invisible. Not entirely. Someone had seen me. Even then, even all those years ago. You remembered her, I said softly. But why me? The question finally came out. The one that had been sitting quietly beneath everything else. Why me? Out of everyone. Out of everything. Why bring me here? Daniel didn't answer right away. He took a step closer, not invading my space, but closing the distance just enough to make the moment more personal. Because you're the last piece of that memory that's still here, he said. I blinked. What do you mean? My mother passed when I was young, he said. That family, they moved away not long after I left. Everything from that time disappeared. He paused. Except you. The weight of his words settled slowly. You're the only person left who knew her, he continued, who understood what she created in that kitchen. My chest tightened, and I needed to know. He added quietly. Know what? If it was real, he said. The simplicity of the answer caught me off guard. All of it, he continued. The warmth, the safety, the feeling that someone cared. He glanced around the kitchen briefly. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people, he said. But that doesn't mean I've felt seen. I understood that too. More than I wanted to admit. So this dinner, I began. It's not about impressing anyone, he said gently. Not for me. I looked at him carefully. Then what is it about? He held my gaze. It's about remembering something that mattered. The room seemed quieter again, not because it had changed, but because something inside me had, for the first time since I arrived. The fear started to fade, not completely, but enough. Because this wasn't a test. Not really. It wasn't about proving myself to him. or to the chefs, or to anyone else in this building. It was about something much simpler, something much more human. A memory, a connection, a moment in time that had meant something and still did. I took a slow breath, then nodded. I can do that, I said. Daniel studied me for a second longer. Then he smiled again. I know you can. And just like that, the kitchen didn't feel like a place I didn't belong anymore. It felt like somewhere I had been brought to for a reason. Not to be judged, not to be tested, but to remind someone, and maybe even myself, that some things never lose their value. After that conversation, everything changed. Not in the way I expected. The kitchen didn't suddenly become easier. The pressure didn't disappear. The expectations were still there, silent, heavy watching. But something inside me shifted. Before I had been cooking to prove something, to the chefs, to my family, to myself. Now I was cooking for something else entirely. For a memory. For a woman who had stood in a small kitchen in Kentucky and made a boy feel seen. For a moment that had somehow carried itself across 43 years and landed right here. I rolled up my sleeves and returned to the counter. And this time, my hands didn't shake. Chef Martin approached again, but his posture had changed. Less guarded, more attentive.
You've got about 3 hours before service, he said. We'll need timing on each course. I nodded. I know. He paused, then added, if you need help coordinating the staff. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw respect. Not full, not complete, but real. I'll let you know, I said. He nodded once, then stepped back. I turned to the assistant who had been watching me earlier, the young woman with curious eyes. What's your name? I asked. Lily, she said quickly. Lily, I repeated. I'll need your help with the vegetables. Her face lit up slightly. Of course. I smiled faintly, and just like that, something familiar began to take shape. Not just the food, the feeling, the rhythm, the quiet connection between people working towards something together. I showed her how to cut the carrots not just quickly, but evenly. Consistency matters, I said. Not just for appearance, but for cooking time. She nodded, watching carefully. Like this, she asked, adjusting her grip. Exactly. And for a moment, I wasn't in the governor's kitchen anymore. I was back in that small house in Kentucky, standing beside my mother, learning, listening, becoming. The hours passed faster after that. The pot roast was searing perfectly, the rich scent filling the air. The green beans were prepped, the bacon crisping slowly to release its flavor. And then, the peaches. I paused when I reached for them, not because I didn't know what to do, but because this part mattered the most. The cobbler, the dish that had started all of this, the one thing that connected everything together. I picked up a peach, turning it slowly in my hand. It was different from the ones we used back then. Brighter, more perfect. But I knew better. Perfection wasn't about appearance. It was about care. I began slicing them slowly, deliberately, letting the juice run slightly over my fingers. Lily watched quietly beside me. Why are you doing it like that? She asked. I smiled softly. Because it matters how it feels, I said. She frowned slightly. Feels? I nodded. You can tell a lot about food by how it feels in your hands, I explained. Not just how it looks. She considered that, then nodded, and kept watching. Across the room, I could feel Daniel's presence. He wasn't standing close anymore, but he hadn't left. Every now and then,
I would catch a glimpse of him speaking quietly with staff, observing the preparations, but always returning his attention to this corner. To me. Not in a way that made me nervous, in a way that made me steady. Like someone was holding the memory with me. As the cobbler came together, the kitchen began to fill with a familiar scent. Warm, sweet, comforting. It moved through the room slowly, wrapping around everything. And I saw it. The shift. Again. The chefs noticed. The assistants paused slightly. Even Chef Martin looked up from across the room. "That smells," Lily whispered. "Like home," I finished. She smiled. "Yeah." For a moment, no one spoke, because some things don't need explanation. The oven door closed with a soft click, and I stepped back, wiping my hands on a towel. It was almost time. Dinner service would begin soon. Guests would arrive, plates would be served, and everything we had prepared would be tested not just for taste, but for meaning. Chef Martin approached again. "We're ready when you are," he said. I nodded. "Then let's begin." The next hour moved like a current I couldn't control but didn't need to. Dishes were plated, courses were timed, staff moved with precision. And through it all, I stayed focused, not on perfection, but on intention. Every plate that left that kitchen carried something more than food. It carried memory, care, something real. And then, the final course, the cobbler. I took a deep breath as I opened the oven. The scent hit me immediately. Stronger now, full, complete. The crust was golden, the filling bubbling just beneath the surface, exactly as it should be. I closed my eyes for a brief second, and in that moment, I could almost hear her. "Take your time, Jake." I smiled faintly. "I did," I whispered. Lily stood beside me watching. "It's beautiful," she said. I nodded. "Let's plate it." As we worked, I noticed something at the edge of my vision. Daniel. He had stepped closer again, not interfering, not directing, just there, watching, waiting, not for the food, for the moment. The first plate was ready, then the second, then the third, each one placed carefully, intentionally. And as the staff began carrying them out, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Because no matter what happened next, I had done what I came here to do. I had honored the memory. I had told the story, without words, through something simple, something real. And now, it was out of my hands. The moment the last plate left the kitchen, everything went quiet again. Not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness, but the kind that comes from waiting. Every chef, every assistant, even Chef Martin, they all paused just slightly, as if the entire room was holding its breath at the same time. Because now the food was no longer ours. It was theirs. The guests, the governor's table, the people who would decide without saying it out loud whether this had been worth it. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel, staring at the empty counter in front of me. For the first time since I arrived, there was nothing left to do. Lily stepped closer, her voice quiet. "Do you want to go out there?" she asked. I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "This part isn't for me." She frowned slightly. "But don't you want to see their reaction?" I hesitated. Of course I did. Every part of me wanted to know, to hear, to understand if what I had made still carried the same meaning it once did. But another part of me, a deeper part already knew. It doesn't matter, I said gently. She studied my face, trying to understand. I gave her a small smile. Not the way you think it does. She didn't fully get it, but she nodded anyway and stepped back. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. Time felt strange, stretching and folding in ways I couldn't measure. The kitchen had resumed its quiet rhythm, but it wasn't the same as before. There was tension now, expectation. Even Chef Martin seemed distracted, glancing toward the door more often than usual. Then, footsteps. Fast, purposeful. The door opened, and one of the staff members stepped inside, his expression unreadable at first. Everyone looked up.
Chef, he said, addressing Martin. Yes, Martin replied. The man hesitated. Then they're asking for the cook. The words landed like a ripple through the room. A few people exchanged glances. Chef Martin turned slowly. His eyes found mine. They want you, he said. My heart skipped. Why, I asked quietly. The staff member shrugged slightly. They didn't say. Of course they didn't. This was the moment. The one I had been moving towards since the phone call. The one I hadn't allowed myself to fully imagine. Because imagining it meant risking disappointment. And I had lived with enough of that. I took a slow breath. Then another. Okay, I said. Lily stepped closer again. You've got this, she whispered. I smiled faintly. I already did, I replied. And for the first time, I believed it. I followed the staff member out of the kitchen. The hallway felt longer now than it had when I first walked through it. Quieter, heavier. Each step echoed slightly against the polished floors, reminding me that I was moving towards something I couldn't control anymore. We reached the dining room doors. Large, closed, final. The staff member paused, then looked at me. They're waiting. I nodded. He opened the doors. And just like that, I stepped into a different world. The room was elegant, but not overwhelming. Soft lighting. A long table. People seated in quiet conversation. And at the center, Daniel. Governor Whitaker. He looked up immediately, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. The conversations around the table slowed, then stopped. All eyes turned toward me. And suddenly I was visible, completely. There was nowhere to hide, no kitchen to retreat to, no task to focus on, just me. Standing there, exposed. Ms. Gallagher, Daniel said, rising from his seat. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something I recognized now. Emotion. I stepped forward slowly. Yes. He gestured toward the table. Would you join us? The question caught me off guard. I don't think that's necessary, I said quickly. But he shook his head. It is, he said gently. The room was silent, waiting, watching. I hesitated. Then I nodded. A chair was pulled out for me. Not at the end, not off to the side, but at the table, among them. I sat down, carefully aware of every movement, every glance. The people around this table were well-dressed, composed, clearly accustomed to spaces like this. And then there was me, still smelling faintly of flour and peaches, still carrying pieces of a past no one else here understood. Except him. Daniel sat back down across from me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, one of the guests, a woman with silver hair and a kind expression, smiled. This meal, she began, is extraordinary. My breath caught slightly. Thank you, I said. She shook her head. No,
she said softly. It's more than that. Others nodded. Murmurs of agreement followed. The pot roast, another guest said, I haven't tasted anything like that in years. It reminds me of my grandmother's cooking, someone else added. That's exactly it, the first woman said. It feels familiar. Familiar. The word echoed, because that's what it was supposed to be. Not impressive, not complicated, just real. I glanced at Daniel. He hadn't said anything yet, but he was watching. Not the guests. Me. Waiting. Finally, he spoke. The cobbler, he said. The room quieted again. It's the same, he continued. I felt my chest tighten. The same as what the silver-haired woman asked. Daniel didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on mine. The same as the first time I ever tasted it, he said. A silence followed. But this one felt different. Not curious, not polite, intentional. He turned slightly toward the others. When I was younger, he said, there was a woman who cooked for the family I was staying with. He paused. She didn't have much, he continued. But what she gave? He turned slightly toward the others. When I was younger, he said, there was a woman who cooked for the family I was staying with. He paused. She didn't have much, he continued, but what she gave mattered. I felt my hands tighten in my lap, because I knew who he was talking about. And her daughter, he added quietly, stood beside her. Learning, watching, becoming. My throat tightened. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until it started to hurt. That woman, he said, his voice steady, taught me something I've carried my entire life. The room was completely still now. What's that? Someone asked softly. He looked at me again. That being seen can change everything. The words settled deep. Not just for me, for everyone at that table. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about food. It never had been. It was about something much more powerful. Something quiet. Something simple. Something most people overlook. The ability to make someone feel like they matter. I blinked back the sting in my eyes, forcing myself to stay steady. Daniel smiled, soft, genuine. Thank you, he said. Not as a governor, not as a host, but as the boy who had once stood in the corner of a small kitchen and finally felt seen. And in that moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't realize how long I had been holding my breath until the conversation at the table slowly returned to normal. Voices picked back up. Soft laughter followed. Utensils clinked gently against plates. But something had changed. Not just in the room. In me. I sat there quietly for a few more minutes, listening more than speaking. People continued to compliment the food, not in a loud or exaggerated way, but in that calm, sincere tone that told me they meant it. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to shrink when someone noticed my work. I let it exist. I let it be enough. Daniel leaned slightly closer, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You handled that well, he said. I let out a small breath. I wasn't sure I would. He smiled faintly. I was. I glanced at him. You seem very certain about that. I am, he said simply. Something about his certainty made me pause. Because for so long, no one had been certain about me. Not my family, not even myself. And now, here was someone who had known me as a child, speaking with a kind of quiet confidence I didn't recognize. It felt no one had been certain about me, not my family, not even myself. And now here was someone who had known me as a child, speaking with a kind of quiet confidence I didn't recognize. It felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. I should probably get back to the kitchen, I said after a moment. Daniel nodded, but his expression shifted slightly. Of course, he said. But before you go, I hesitated. Yes. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, carefully handled. He placed it gently on the table between us. I've carried this for years, he said. My brow furrowed slightly as I reached for it. When I unfolded it, my breath caught. It was a recipe card, old, faded, the ink slightly smudged from time. But the handwriting, I knew it instantly. My mother's, Eleanor Gallagher. My fingers trembled slightly as I traced the familiar lines. Peach cobbler. The same recipe. The original. I thought I lost everything from that time, Daniel said quietly. But I kept this. I couldn't speak. Not right away. Because suddenly, the distance between past and present collapsed completely. This wasn't just memory anymore. It was proof. You kept this all these years. I finally managed. He nodded. It reminded me of something I didn't want to forget. I looked up at him. And what was that? He didn't hesitate this time. That I mattered to someone. The words hit deeper than anything else he had said. Because I understood them. Because I had spent years wondering if I mattered at all. I folded the recipe carefully, handing it back to him. You should keep it, I said softly. He looked at me for a moment, then shook his head. No, he said. He gently pushed it back toward me. It belongs to you. My chest tightened. I have copies, I said. I don't need. This one is different, he said. I paused, because I knew he was right. This wasn't just a recipe. It was a piece of history, a connection, a reminder that something simple had once meant everything. I hesitated for a long moment, then slowly I took it. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded. You're welcome. There was a quiet understanding between us now. Not spoken, not explained, just there. I'll let you get back, he said after a moment. I stood carefully nodding to the others at the table. Thank you, I said to them, for your kindness. The silver-haired woman smiled warmly. No, dear, she said. Thank you. I turned and walked toward the doors. But before I reached them, Jake. His voice stopped me. I turned back. Daniel stood now, not as the governor, but as something else entirely. Would you be willing to come back? He asked. The question caught me off guard. For what? He hesitated slightly. Not for an event, he said. Not for a dinner like this. I waited. For something smaller, he continued. Something more personal. I studied his face. He wasn't asking out of obligation or politeness. He was asking because it mattered to him. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. He smiled, genuine relieved. Good. I left the dining room, then the doors closing softly behind me. The hallway felt different this time. Not longer, not heavier, just quieter. Like something inside me had settled. When I returned to the kitchen, the atmosphere shifted again. But this time, it wasn't curiosity. It was respect. Chef Martin approached almost immediately. Well, he asked. I gave a small smile. They liked it. He studied my face carefully, as if looking for something deeper than the words. Then he nodded. I figured they would. It wasn't a compliment. Not exactly, but it was close enough. Lily rushed over next. What did they say? She asked excitedly. I smiled at her. They said it felt like home. Her eyes lit up. That's the best thing anyone can say, she said. I nodded. Yes, I agreed. It is. The rest of the evening passed quickly after that. Cleanup, quiet conversations, small moments of acknowledgement. And through it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride. Not exactly. Something quieter. Something steadier. Worth. When it was time to leave, Rebecca met me at the entrance again. The car is ready, she said. Thank you. As I stepped outside, the air felt cooler, lighter. The same city surrounded me, but I didn't feel the same inside it. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not because of the governor, not because of the dinner, but because I had finally seen myself. The ride home was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't crowded. They weren't filled with doubt or second-guessing. They were still. And when the car pulled up in front of my house, I didn't hesitate. I stepped out, walked to the door, and went inside. Because this time, I wasn't coming back as the same person who had left. When I stepped inside the house, everything looked the same. The same couch, the same dining table, the same faint smell of detergent, and last night's dinner still lingering in the air. But it didn't feel the same. Not anymore. Ryan stood up immediately from the living room when he saw me. You're back, he said, his voice carrying something I hadn't heard in a long time. Relief. I am. Melissa followed behind him, her expression more cautious but not cold. How did it go? She asked. Emma peeked out from the hallway, her eyes wide with anticipation. For a moment, I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure how to say it in a way they would understand. It went well, I said simply. Ryan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Really? I nodded. They like the food. Melissa crossed her arms slightly, but her posture wasn't defensive this time, just uncertain. That's good, she said. There was a pause. Then Emma stepped forward. Did you meet the governor? She asked, almost whispering. I smiled faintly. Yes. What was he like? I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, human. They all looked at me slightly confused. Ryan chuckled awkwardly. Well, I guess that's a good thing. I nodded. It is. I walked past them, slowly setting my bag down on the kitchen counter. The same kitchen where everything had started. The same place where I had stood so many times cooking meals that went unnoticed. But now, it felt different. Ryan followed me in. Mom, did something happen? He asked. I turned to face him. What do you mean? You just seem different, he said. I considered that. Then I nodded. I am. Melissa stepped into the doorway, watching carefully. In what way? She asked. I took a slow breath. In the way that I finally understand something I didn't before. They waited. So, tell us, Ryan said. I looked at both of them, really looked, not as the people I had spent years trying to please, but as people who had never really seen me, not completely. I wasn't invited there because of luck, I said. Ryan frowned slightly. Then why? Because someone remembered me, I said. The room went quiet. Melissa's expression shifted. Just slightly. From when? She asked. From before I met your father, I replied. That caught their attention. I used to help my mother cook, I continued, in a house where a young boy was staying for a while. Emma leaned in slightly, listening. That boy. I paused. He grew up to become Governor Whitaker. Ryan blinked. Wait, what? He remembered my mother, I said. And he remembered me. Melissa shook her head slightly. That doesn't make sense, she said. Why would something like that matter now? I held her gaze. Because it mattered then. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. For years I continued. I thought what I did didn't mean much. That cooking was just something I did because it was expected. Ryan looked down slightly. Melissa didn't move. But today I said I realized something. I stepped closer to the counter, placing my hands on its surface. Something small can mean everything to someone else. Emma nodded slowly like she understood. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. And you think that's why he invited you? Melissa asked. I know it is, I said. Another silence. Then Ryan spoke again. Mom, why didn't you ever tell us this before? The question hit harder than I expected, because I didn't have a simple answer. I didn't think it mattered, I said honestly. But it does, Emma said quickly. I looked at her. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. It matters to me. My chest tightened. Because that was something I hadn't expected. Ryan looked up again. And what happens now? He asked. I hesitated. Because this was the part that still felt uncertain. He asked me to come back, I said. Melissa's eyes widened slightly. For another dinner? I shook my head. No. Then what? I took a slow breath. For something smaller, I said. Something personal. Ryan frowned. What does that mean? I paused, choosing my words carefully. It means he wants to remember something that he doesn't want to lose again. Melissa studied my face. And you're going to do it? I nodded. Yes. She didn't respond right away, but something in her expression softened. Not completely, but enough. I didn't realize. She began, then stopped. I waited. She sighed quietly. I didn't realize your cooking meant that much to anyone. There it was. Not an apology, not exactly, but closer than anything she had ever said before. I held her gaze. It didn't, I said, gently. Not here. The truth settled heavily between us. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. We just thought it was normal, he said. I know, I replied. And maybe that's the problem. They both looked at me. When something is always there, I said, people stop noticing it. Emma stepped closer again. I noticed, she said quietly. I smiled at her. I know you did. And for a moment, that was enough. Ryan walked over to the counter, leaning against it. So, what now? He asked again. This time, the question felt different, less uncertain, more open. I looked around the kitchen, at the space where I had spent so much time, at the place where I had felt invisible. And then, I keep cooking, I said. Ryan blinked. That's it. I smiled faintly. That's everything. Melissa exhaled slowly. And do we get to try it this time? She asked. I looked at her carefully. There was no mockery in her voice, no dismissal, just curiosity, maybe even a little humility. Yes, I said, and this time, I added, I'd like you to actually taste it. She nodded. I will. And for the first time, I believed her. because something had changed, not just in me, in them. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to begin. That night, as I stood in the kitchen again, it didn't feel like the same place anymore, because this time, I wasn't cooking to be seen. I was cooking because I already was. The next morning felt different. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just quietly, undeniably different. Sunlight poured into the kitchen the same way it always had, stretching across the counter in long, familiar lines. The clock ticked softly on the wall. The house was still. But for the first time in years, sunlight poured into the kitchen the same way it always had, stretching across the counter in long, familiar lines. The clock ticked softly on the wall. The house was still, but for the first time in years. That stillness didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. I stood at the counter with a cup of coffee, not rushing, not thinking about what needed to be done next. Just being. And that was new. Footsteps came slowly down the stairs. Emma. She hesitated in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she was interrupting something. "Morning, Grandma," she said. I smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart." She stepped into the kitchen, glancing at the counter. "What are you making today?" she asked. The question caught me off guard, because it wasn't filled with doubt or embarrassment, just curiosity. "I hadn't decided yet," I said. She nodded slowly. Then, "Can I help?" I blinked. "What?" She shrugged slightly, a small, almost shy smile forming. "You always say cooking takes time. Maybe I could learn?" My chest tightened. Not painfully, but deeply, because suddenly I wasn't the only one remembering something. I set my coffee down. "I'd like that," I said softly. Her smile grew just a little. "Okay." We stood side by side at the counter, and for a moment, I saw it. Not just the present, the past. My mother standing beside me, teaching, guiding. And now it was my turn. First thing I said gently, "We take our time." Emma nodded seriously. "Okay." I handed her a knife, guiding her grip carefully. "Not too fast," I added. She laughed softly. "Got it." We worked quietly at first, cutting, measuring, learning. And slowly, the kitchen filled with something familiar. Not just the smell of food, the feeling of connection. A little while later, Ryan walked in. He stopped when he saw us. "You two look busy," he said. Emma grinned. "I'm learning." Ryan looked at me, something soft in his expression. "That's good," he said. Melissa followed behind him, pausing in the doorway. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just watched. Then, "That smells nice," she said. I glanced at her. "Thank you." There was no sarcasm, no hesitation, just a simple acknowledgement. And somehow, that meant more than anything she could have said before. We all ended up in the kitchen that morning, not in a forced way. Not because we had to, but because something had shifted. Something quiet. Something real. Emma asked questions. Ryan stayed longer than usual. Melissa even helped set the table. Small things. But they mattered, because they were different. When the food was ready, we sat down together. The same table, the same chairs, but nothing felt the same. Emma took the first bite, then paused. Her eyes widened slightly. "This is really good," she said. I smiled. "Thank you." Ryan tried next. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is," he admitted. Melissa hesitated for a moment, then took a bite. and something changed in her expression. Not dramatically, but enough. I didn't realize she began, then stopped. I waited. She looked at me. "It's not just food, is it?" I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "It never was." Silence settled over the table again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of understanding that didn't need to be explained. After breakfast, Emma stayed behind while the others cleared the table. "Grandma," she said. "Yes." "Do you think I could come with you next time?" she asked. I tilted my head slightly. "To the governor's?" She nodded. "Or wherever you go." My heart softened. "I think I'd like that very much," I said. She smiled, and just like that, something new began. Later that afternoon, I stood alone in the kitchen again. But this time, I didn't feel alone, because the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with something I had almost forgotten. Possibility. A few days later, I received another call. Not formal, not distant, just Daniel. "I was hoping you'd come by this weekend," he said. "No guests, just dinner." I smiled. "It'll be there." And this time, I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything, because I understood now. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about something much simpler. Connection, memory, and the quiet power of being seen. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the kitchen one more time, at the place where everything had started, at the place where I had once felt invisible. And I realized something. I had never been invisible. Not really. I had just been surrounded by people who didn't know how to see. But now, that had changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to begin again. I picked up my mother's recipe card, the original one Daniel had returned to me. The ink was still faded, the edges still worn, but it felt different in my hands now. Not like something fragile, but like something enduring. Something that had survived time distance and even being forgotten. I placed it carefully back in the box, not hidden, not buried, just kept, because some things aren't meant to be left behind. They're meant to be carried forward, shared, remembered, and passed on. Just like I was doing now. Just like my mother once did. And for the first time in a long time, I felt exactly where I was meant to be. Sometimes the things we are most ashamed of are the very things that make us irreplaceable. Jake spent years believing her cooking was outdated, unwanted, and meaningless. She listened to criticism, to silence, to dismissal, and slowly she began to believe it herself. But the truth was never that her cooking had no value. The truth was that the people around her had simply stopped seeing it. And that happens more often than we realize. We overlook the people closest to us. We take their efforts for granted. We assume that what is always there will always be there. Until one day, it isn't. This story reminds us of something deeply human. Being seen is one of the most powerful things we can give someone. And sometimes, the smallest acts, like a home-cooked meal, can leave the deepest impact. Jake didn't change who she was. She didn't become someone new. She simply returned to what had always been true. And in doing so, she reminded others of its value. So let me ask you, have you ever overlooked someone in your life who quietly gave their love day after day? Or maybe Have you ever felt invisible yourself? If this story touched you even a little, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What time is it there right now? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind someone that they are not invisible.